and author of this book, which welcome everybody to this webinar with a family tree. I'm Christine Altwies, and today we're going to be talking with our incredible guest and journalist, author, adoptee, who wrote this book called The Missing Link, which, as I was just telling her, I finished today and I had to redo my makeup because it made me cry so hard. Stacy Sato. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you. And for those who don't know you or who haven't read your book yet, you're a part-time resident of California and Hawaii. So you kind of have the best of all worlds, don't you?
Correct. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay, so we thought we would start by asking Stacy some questions, talking a little bit about her book, following up with some questions from the book, and then throw it out to anyone who wants to ask questions. And then we'll also give Stacy an opportunity to say a few things once I'm done with my questions. I think we've got the option of letting people ask questions while we go. Shayla will handle that. So if you do have a question, feel free to interrupt me and ask your question while it's fresh in your mind. Okay, so for those who haven't read this book, it is an adoption reunion story. It is about a young girl who is born in California to a birth mother who's from Hawaii, raised in a family that was racially similar to her own cultural genetic heritage, but not exactly. And the story is of searching and reunifying with birth family. So I just want to say that, first of all, it's really well written, which was a relief, because sometimes when people write their memoirs, you really want to hear the story, but you have to get through the writing, and you are a fabulous writer. So thank you for making that part so easy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. One of the first things that struck me was early on in your story, you write about a woman coming to the front door of your house. You were living with your family. And for purposes of this discussion, when we say family, we'll be meaning the family that you spent the majority of your life with, which is the family that adopted you and raised you. They adopted you close to the time of birth, not exactly at birth, but fairly close to your time of birth. And you have been with your family your whole life. When we talk about your birth mom, we'll call her birth mom, birth dad, birth siblings. There's a whole huge ohana that comes into this story.
Yeah.
That's just a Hawaiian style, very, very much Hawaiian style. So that's how we'll refer to people. So you were at home with your mom in your home in California, and someone came to the door, unremarkable kind of day, and you answered the door. I think you were 6.
That's correct.
Yeah, and this woman, who you may or may not have known very well, felt it was appropriate to say to you and your mom, who is now standing behind you, you know, you don't look anything like your mom. I think that's sort of what she said.
Right.
And that just raised goosebumps and alarms in me. And this is so important because this is something we hear all the time in adoption, that how you look is everything, because it's the first thing that goes out into the world. Before you can open your mouth and say something, before anyone can get to know you, before you have any ability to interact, people see and they judge, right?
Right.
And even when you're a little child, not maybe even aware of how you look,
Right.
an adult stranger would feel it's appropriate to comment on it. And what really struck me was how that impacted you. Can you say a little bit more about that moment and how that changed you, or what that did to little 6-year-old you?
Sure. So that was really the first time that I realized that I looked different from my family, because she made that comment. Up until then, I really didn't know that I looked any different than my family. And so when she made that comment, I, asked my mom, what did she mean by that? And my mom at that time said, don't worry, you're my precious daughter. We love you. And she didn't, at that point, I didn't know that I was adopted. So that was my first experience with, I guess, an identity issue, knowing that I look different than my family. And so that was
Right.
significant. That was very significant in my life.
I have so many questions about that. I skipped over the part that you weren't told at birth. So nowadays, when we work with adoptive families, we instruct them that being transparent from day one is really important. So even if your child is a week old and doesn't understand the word adoption, you want to start weaving that word into the stories that they know about themselves, so that when they do finally understand that word, it's already connected to them and it already makes sense.
Absolutely.
But back in the time, just a few years ago when you were born, people did things differently. So two questions I have about that. One is, how different did you look from your parents who raised you? Not that different, right?
No, actually, I did look different. So my parents are 100% Japanese, and
Okay.
I have no Japanese. I am Hawaiian, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, Portuguese. And so I look significantly different than my parents.
Okay. Super important point to the white families that are adopting is that we often throw all Asians into one pot, right? Or all white people into one pot when we're trying to think about how our children will look in the future. But obviously in the Asian community, there are myriad different cultures, ethnic backgrounds, races. And so even though you may or may not consider yourself Asian, I don't know what you consider yourself, being raised in a Japanese family, there was a visible difference, is what
Yes,
you're
correct.
saying.
That's
Okay.
correct.
What do you consider yourself, or how do you identify?
Pacific Islander.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So let's talk about that. What happened after the woman asked you this rather bold question or stated this bold fact? You didn't know you were adopted at that point. How did that unfold for you with your mom and with your adoption awareness after that?
Soon after that, my mom did explain to me that I was adopted and that I didn't grow in her womb, and that my birth mother was very young when she gave birth to me, and she couldn't care for me, and that my parents wanted a child and they weren't able to have one, and that God led them to me, and that I was chosen. Those were the exact words she used.
Yeah, we talk about chosen children and we hope that that comforts them. How did that feel to you? Can you remember what that moment felt like and what that was like?
Yeah, I felt special. And I still do. I love my parents very much. And so, they said that I was chosen, and that made me feel very special.
Okay. And any thoughts you had previously had about having been in your mom's body? I mean, it's hard to know when children start making assumptions about how they came into the world, but there was no disconnect for you. It sounds like you accepted it as the truth and as all you needed to know at that point.
Pretty much, yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't really ask a whole lot of questions at that point. But that's when the wheels started to turn, when I started to think about, well, who is my birth mother?
Mm-hmm. And you had a sister growing up. Can you share a little bit about that and what that relationship was like, and how she looked, and whether that how she looked was played any factor in how you felt about yourself?
Sure. So yeah, she was also adopted, and she is 5 years older than me. So they adopted her first, and then she's Japanese, 100% Japanese. So she looks or could pass, as a biological daughter to my parents. We had a great relationship. Growing up, she was significantly older, and so we had different activities that we did and so forth. But overall, it was a great family environment.
Mm-hmm. I'm turning off my phone. Okay. And the fact that she looked more like your family who raised you and you didn't, did that become an issue for you at any point? Or did you feel that it was a non-issue because you were so loved? And
no, it really didn't become an issue. The fact that she looked like them and that I didn't, it really didn't.
okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like they instilled such a sense of confidence in you and such a sense of belonging. And they did a really good job with that. That sort of,
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. So for the parents watching, the adoptive parents or the parents who are planning to adopt, these are some of the questions that they ask themselves as they start to think about how they can be the best parents ever. So anything that you feel they should know, feel free to
Okay.
spit it out and share with them.
Sure.
I loved the part where you were sort of, now that you know you're adopted, you're starting to see things a little differently. You're starting to put pieces together. And then you had this moment where you talk about your love of music. Can you
Yes.
share a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I was about 7, I loved the guitar. I was just drawn to the guitar. And so my parents put me through guitar lessons. And then when I was 10, I took voice lessons. And I didn't know where that came from, that passion for music. Come to find out later on that my birth father was a musician and that he played the guitar, and, that's what he did for a living. So it's very interesting how, my passions came from that passion anyway, came from my birth father.
So that's the nature part. When we often think about nature, nurture, and we try and figure out, how these things affect us, it sounds like the nature component, the genetic predisposition to be inclined to musical things was okay. And your parents who raised you were not musical.
No, not at all.
Okay. All right. No harm in not being musical. They probably appreciated music in some way.
But they really, helped me tap into my passion. So whatever it was that I was interested in, whether it be guitar or tennis or soccer, they allowed me to pursue those passions.
So I guess for parents watching, that's a really important point, is that we want to trust our children when it comes to their interests. And even if it's something that we don't necessarily connect with, there may be a really good reason why we want to support something that they're interested in. And it could be something as deeply profound as a genetic proclivity to doing something well. Are you still musically inclined? Are you still playing the guitar?
Actually, I'm not, but I could easily pick it up and, play, but I still love music. And, actually come to find out, my half siblings are also very musically inclined as well. So on my birth father's side. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great. Okay, so then we move on to, as your story develops, so you got this letter or this document that your mother gave you at some point, because you asked for any information that she would have, and it was a letter about your birth parents from the agency that had placed you.
Correct.
And we often talk about the importance of information and all the things that we as children born and raised to our biological parents take for granted. We take so much for granted. Information that we have access to, information that everybody around us knows about us, simple facts that you as an adoptee didn't have access to.
Right.
And even though you were a child, some of these things were really important to you.
Absolutely.
So can you describe or share a little bit more about what happened when you got that first document that your mom gave you that had the information about your birth parents on it? I think you were 12, or were you in high school already? 12.
No, I was about 12. And so it was a closed adoption. And so the only information that my parents received was a 1-page letter or informational sheet that gave very generic, I guess, information about my birth mother and my birth father. It didn't have any names or photos or anything like that. It did say that my father was, musically inclined. So was my birth mother. And they described in detail what my birth mother looked like anyway, and why she gave me up for adoption. And so all of that information was just stunning to me, because I had never known any of this. And my parents felt that at that age, I was ready to, receive that information. And I think that was a good age for me to have, read that.
Yeah. So as we hear you talking about this, it was sort of generic information. There wasn't any like identifying information, no great detail. And yet it still was impactful.
Absolutely. Very much.
Just knowing, I think your mom's height and weight were in that document.
Yes.
Like, right? And just knowing these little things about who you might be and how you might be, why you might be the way you are.
Right. And also the reason why she gave me up. That was very important as well, you know, for me to know that she loved me. She was just very young. She was 19 years old and she couldn't care for me on her own. And so, you know, she was living in Hawaii and she moved to California to give birth to me because she didn't want her family to know that she was pregnant. And so, you know, just knowing that she sacrificed so much for me was just wonderful. I mean, you know, I felt so much love for her.
Yeah. That's wonderful to hear. I know that often adoptive parents worry about conflicting relationships or conflicting emotional relationships if their child does know about birth mom or birth dad or does have a relationship with them. Can you share a little bit about, and I know later on this becomes more relevant when you actually meet your birth mom, but at that moment when you first learned that information about your birth mom, can you address how, if at all, it affected your relationship with the mother who was raising you at that time?
It didn't affect the relationship. In fact, both of my parents said that they would be very supportive if I ever wanted to find my birth parents, and that I would need to be 18 years old, you know, to actually do that, but that they would be behind me 100%.
Yeah, they did the right thing. It sounds like they were wonderful people.
Oh, very much.
That's good. There was something in that document also that you sort of wrote about afterwards, and it was really touching to me. I guess there was a question at one point about whether your birth mom and birth dad would marry, and that that they decided not to, and that was difficult. There was a difficult decision, and that sort of stuck with you, like the what if of it, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, the document basically said that they, you know, had significant differences, but it also said that my birth mother was afraid of my birth father. And so it didn't go into detail as to why. And so I was very curious about that.
Yeah. And it's difficult because very often in domestic adoptions, the reason the birth mother is placing the child and the reason the birth mother makes this very difficult decision, the most difficult heroic decision she can make, because it's never easy under any circumstances for a woman to place a child for adoption. It is gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, and will affect them for the rest of their lives. And that comes out later also in your story. But often, unfortunately, the reason she's making this decision is because the birth father is either not present, not helpful, not supportive, maybe doesn't know, but usually there is some contention in the relationship.
Mhm.
And so for you, as you read this or learned this, that they didn't get married because she was afraid of him, did that live in you at all as you thought about your birth father?
I was curious about it, but it didn't drive me to want to then find him. You know, my first search was for my birth mother. I wanted to meet her and,
Right.
and find out all the answers. Yeah.
And also importantly, it didn't turn you off to eventually look for him, because that's the fear, right? We don't want children to ever be burdened by challenging information about a birth parent, right? So we try to shield them, but also we don't want to lie,
Right.
you know. So in this case, you got the information, and luckily it didn't eventually deter you from looking for him.
Correct. That is correct.
That's important. Okay. Something else that you talk about after that is, oh my God, this also broke my heart. You wrote this letter to the agency. You were about to go off to college. I think you were 16 or 17. And you wrote this letter to the agency asking for more information, or asking if you could, you know, do a search or have a connection somehow.
Right.
And reading that letter from the little teenage you, my heart broke, and I thought, I know, because I've received those letters. And then the answer you got back, you know, was like, thanks, but, you know, we don't have this manpower to handle this. So, you know, unless this is an emergency, take a break and we'll get back to you in a year.
Exactly.
And that was a super long year for you.
Yes, it was very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you were in college and you got the letter. And now I have goosebumps again. Can you share with us what that letter was and what that was like to receive?
You're talking about the letter from
the agency, I think, that you got back eventually with more information?
yes. So they did send me more information about both of my birth parents, and it explained in detail that I have half siblings, and how many aunts and uncles I had on each side of the family. And all of a sudden, my story is starting to unfold, right before my eyes. And it just, again, it just really, I was just driven to find my birth mother. Just knowing that there's an extended family out there as well now. I really didn't even think about that before.
So you were focused on birth mom, maybe birth dad, and it didn't even dawn on you that every human has relatives, right? So
Exactly.
that birth mom would have all these other people.
Yes.
And suddenly that becomes part of did you feel, can you describe the feelings you had about these people you didn't know? Were you more excited and hopeful? Were you afraid? Was it a combination? Did you feel the love even though you didn't know these people? How did you start to think about them before you connected with them?
I was very excited to learn that I have siblings, and most important for me, and I'm not sure why this is, but I wanted to see someone who looked like me, because all of my childhood growing up, people would comment to my parents that I don't look like them, or what nationality is Stacy, and all of these things about my looks. And so to find out that I have siblings now, I wondered, do we look alike? Do we have similar mannerisms, similar interests? And I really wanted to know more about them.
Yeah, this is, for some reason, this piece makes me really emotional because, again, when we think of all the things we take for granted as people who are raised by the parents who birth us, wanting to see yourself reflected in the world somehow is really such a profound thing, because again, as I said at the very beginning, how we look is one of the first things that the world sees. It's the most important thing in many ways. When you don't open your mouth, someone across the room, across the street, whatever, that's how they judge us. So it's a very profound piece. Okay, I need my tissue box. So you get the letter, you're in college, and now you have, okay, so I gotta say this part, it's the olden days, right? Nowadays, we get a name, we go to Google,
right.
There is everything we could possibly want to know about the person. This is the olden days, not that far, not that long ago, but long ago enough that it was before everything was available on the internet.
Right.
So you had to pay this woman to do a search for you.
Yes.
Right.
Correct. I hired a private investigator after I graduated from college.
Right. So you worked, you saved up your money.
Correct. And I did not tell my parents that I was searching for them, even though they told me that they would be supportive 100%. I did not want them to think that they were not enough for me, but I needed to know for myself, and I wanted to know for myself who my birth mother was. But I loved my parents so much, I did not want to hurt them. And I thought that by sharing that with them, that I wanted, to find my birth mother, that it might hurt them. So I chose to go that route.
You're not going to believe this, but this is the thing I tell all parents every time I do a training. No matter how much you love your child, no matter how much you share with them that you are not threatened by their birth family, no matter how much you encourage them to do the search, children are fiercely loyal to the parents who raised them.
Yes.
Those are the words I use. Children are fiercely loyal. And even if they know that you want them to do the search, they will often wait. And as somebody who's done a lot of searches myself, it breaks my heart that I often get the call from the adoptee who is finally starting the search for their birth family after the family who has raised them has passed away. They will often wait until their parents die before they will start a search. And often then it's too late.
Right.
Right. So as the person who went through this, what would you tell our parents watching this? What, if anything, can they do to help their children feel okay about starting that search? About how it won't, what could someone have said to you to help you do that search and tell your parents about it? Or is there no way that that could have happened?
I think I was determined on my own to go out and see. The other thing is, if I wasn't successful at finding her, I knew my parents would be just as sad and, disappointed as I would be, and I didn't want to hurt them. So you're right. I was fiercely loyal to my parents who raised me. And so I just didn't want to hurt them if it didn't work out either. And I knew they would be sad and disappointed. So
maybe that's the more important point here. Thank you for helping me work through this, because you've just given me a new idea. Maybe the fact is, this is your journey. And as parents, we can only do so much. We have to know when to let go. We have to know when to say, this is not my journey at this point. I am the mother who loves you, and I want only the best for you. And I feel very connected to you, but I have to accept that there are some things I can't be involved in. And this part of the journey is so personal that you have to do it alone. And I have to understand that I can't be involved. Is that maybe one way to look at it?
I think so. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Okay, working it through as the mother of children who are adopted. It's all about, figuring these things out. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting in this, and it's something that we've heard before, but reading your version of it was really powerful. The fear of rejection.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? The fear of rejection. So your birth mother places you for adoption. You know that she did it as a loving gesture.
Yes.
You know that it was hard for her. And still there's this rejection that you feel on a cellular level, maybe sort of growing up. And then the fear of rejection a second time when you start your search for her, when you start to reach out to her. Can you share a little bit about what that felt like?
Yeah, so just growing up, I always had a fear of rejection. And I think it's because, I was, when my birth mother gave me up for adoption, in a sense, it was a form of rejection, even though it wasn't. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, so growing up, I would run for student council or things and then not get it. And I felt probably more rejected than most normal people would. I really would take things like that hard. And so going out and trying to find my birth mother, there was a big fear of rejection. I didn't know if she would be open to wanting to meet me or if she had moved on with her life. And because I was so afraid of rejection, it was really difficult, to just keep going at times, because I was just afraid that she wouldn't reciprocate. And so, and even, as I was searching for her, I had sent several letters to the agency, and I kept getting rejection letters saying, she hasn't contacted us, and therefore we can't reach out to her. And so that was another form of rejection. Every single time I'd get a letter from the adoption agency, it just told me that, or I thought that she wasn't interested.
Gosh, so like injury upon injury upon injury. What is really important for us to hear from you on this, and this is so valuable, we often think if you're placed lovingly at birth into a family that wants you and cares for you and loves you so powerfully and nurtures you, how could you feel rejected, right? And what we want people to understand is that that's kind of cellular, like that starts at a subliminal cellular level. It isn't about the acts done to you after that. You could be loved, tremendously.
Yes.
But on some cellular level, that initial rejection by the birth mother is what we call the primal wound. And you can't really explain it, but it lives in you somehow.
It does. It really does.
And also, we can be resilient and we can persevere and we can get past it. So we shouldn't be so afraid of it, right? We just need to acknowledge it. And as parents, we need to parent appropriately, with awareness of that. It sounds like your parents did a great job of providing you with so much nurture and confidence building.
They did, 100%. I couldn't have asked for better parents.
That's nice. That comes through in your book quite a bit. Okay, so then we get to the part where you meet the birth mother. And I'm giving it all away, but I'm also telling everybody, read the book, because even though we're covering it for the purpose of getting your, additional thoughts on it, reading the book is a powerful experience. Okay, so you meet your birth mother, and I yelled from my desk. I was sitting here and I yelled through the office when I got to that part where she answered the phone. I was like, oh my God, I'm crying. Like, just reading about that moment was, I'm about to lose it again. Like, it was so well written. So you connect, safe to say, no surprise, she does not reject you.
Right, correct. She was very happy.
Right. Share what that felt like a little more if you can for folks.
Sure. So the private investigator gave me her contact information, and I want to talk about this part. The investigator told me you can call her or you can write her a letter, but that she recommended that I write her a letter because she may have, we found out that she had a family now and we didn't want to disrupt her life. And so I decided to do that. But before I sent the letter, I was so curious. I just wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to know that she was real. And so I dialed the number, and instead of her answering the phone, my little brother answered the phone. And, I had asked if she was there, and he said, no, she's not. And, and then that was the end of that. But at least I knew that, yes, she is real. And then I wrote her the letter, and that was just waiting for a response to see if she would respond to me was just probably the longest 4 or 5 days of my life. And I had sent the letter from California on a Tuesday, knowing that she'd probably get it on a Friday. I didn't want to disrupt her work week. And I was hoping she'd get it on the weekend so she'd have time to process it. And she did.
So conscientious. You are so sweet and thoughtful.
So she did receive it on Friday after she got home from work. And I was actually just getting home from work. And she called me. As soon as I walked in the door, the phone rang. And my heart just like leaped out of my chest. I didn't know if it was her. I was hoping it was her. But again, I was setting myself up for, no, it's probably my friend who just wants to go out and that sort of thing. And I picked up the phone and it was her. And so I felt like I had won the lottery. Because this was years of buildup, growing up on the playground, I would look out and just wonder, is she looking for me too? And when we're shopping, I look at people and say, could that be her? And then to finally hear her voice for the first time, it really, I felt like I won the lottery.
And it's that simple. You weren't asking for a lot, were you? I mean, it's that simple, just to make that connection.
Absolutely.
And this is something we hear from so many people, is that scanning the room, wondering. This is why open adoption for us as practitioners is so important. Because if your child spends their entire life scanning the room, wondering, in your case, that was necessary because it was a closed adoption, and back then that's how things happen. But nowadays, if you can imagine, you're placed at birth and your adoptive family and your birth family have an ongoing open relationship. You know who your birth mother is. Think of all the time that you don't waste wondering about this basic information. Would you say that, in retrospect, knowing what you know now, that might have been a good option for you, or that would have made your life a little different?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
And can you think how it would have, like things that might have been a little different for you if you hadn't had to wait that long?
Just all the questions that I had growing up, about who she was and, why she was afraid. I mean, I think if I had known her, I could have asked those questions and moved on. But instead, it was just, building up year after, years of wondering and curiosity, and then to finally find her was just wonderful.
Life-changing.
Life-changing.
Yeah, that's one thing we say to parents also, is that even if your child isn't talking about being adopted, even if they're not asking you about their adoption, it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it, and it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it all the time.
Right. Very
Can
true.
you share a little bit about what you remember about like when it would come up for you, or what kinds of situations would make you start to think about being adopted? Were there particular situations that kind of made it come up more than others?
No, like I said, I would always just kind of, wonder if I saw someone who even remotely looked like me, I would wonder if that could be her. And so I was just always very curious, just not
Yeah.
knowing, I always wanted to know who she was, and I was determined to find her.
Yeah. Okay, so now you find her
Yes,
and you get to meet her.
yes,
I'm just kind of jumping way
sure.
ahead. First, you get to meet Kavika, though, your half brother, right? So you
Right.
meet him
Yes,
first.
yes.
Okay. What did that feel like to meet a
Oh my
sibling?
gosh, I'm getting goosebumps now. So yeah, he was the first person that I met from my birth family, and he had come to California. He was, checking out colleges at that time. And so when he walked off the plane and into the airport, and I saw him for the first time, we cried and we hugged each other, and I could see myself in him. And the first thing he said was, "Wow, you look so much like mom," and I hadn't met her yet in person. So that was really interesting. But it was an instant connection with him, immediate, like we had known each other all of our lives.
Wow. Yeah, that's really touching. And then there's also Chemo.
Hmm. Very sweet.
Okay.
Yeah,
He's the younger one, right?
correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now you meet your mom.
Right.
And that's anything you want to share about that moment? What it felt like to finally meet her? I mean, you've already talked to her on the phone, but then you flew to Hawaii to meet her.
Correct. Yeah. So again, the first time just meeting her in the airport, and all I could do really was stare at her. It was amazing because we looked a lot alike, a lot alike. And that was the
Yeah.
first time I ever had seen her. So it
Yeah.
was wonderful.
And part of this story that is also unfortunately not that unusual is that the reason she placed you for adoption, one of the two reasons, which is again not unusual, is that she was either struggling at that time, or if she wasn't really struggling, the placing her child for adoption resulted in what she then said was a lifetime of struggles.
Correct.
Yeah, and this is something that a lot of adoptees, I think, grapple with, is they're often raised in what we'd consider sort of picture perfect families, or, intact families, or stable families, or, families that have access to resources and privilege that some birth mothers don't have access to. And so often there's a sense of guilt or confusion on the part of the person who's adopted when they do finally meet a birth parent who may be struggling.
Right.
Can you say anything about that experience and what that was like?
Yeah. So when I first met her, we would have daily conversations. And as our relationship grew, I realized that she was drinking a lot. And it was hard for me to understand that because I grew up in a very healthy environment. My parents didn't drink and all that. And so I didn't understand it. And now I know that I think it started when she gave me up for adoption. That was the hardest thing she's ever had to do. And so, she struggled with that. And then I wondered why she continued to drink after we met. But, at that point, I think it becomes an addiction or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, she
So,
was very successful during the day. She was a very successful career woman, and she did well for herself. And so, but just in the evenings when we would talk, I was a little disappointed because I wanted to get to know, my birth mother as she is, and not an altered version of her.
yeah. And I think that's part of the difficulty, is sometimes these traumas, take hold and they don't just disappear when the trigger is gone, when the
Right.
issue is resolved. The pain is often, leaves permanent scars.
Yes.
But, nonetheless, it was a really rewarding and important relationship for you, and it changed your life, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, stating the obvious. You also talk a little bit about your sort of relating to your two moms once your birth mom comes into the picture, and sort of a little bit of guilt and confusion about how to manage those relationships. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I first met my birth mom, when she would call me, she would always say, "Hi, it's mom." So she identified herself as mom. And I did not identify her as mom. I already had a mother, Kimiko, who raised me. And so I was very, I didn't want to hurt my mother who raised me by calling my birth mother mom. And it didn't feel right to me. But yet she called herself mom. And, when she'd write letters, she'd end it with mom. And so that was the struggle.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you're sort of placed in the middle, right? You don't ask for this, but it's sort of put upon you. And now you're left to sort of figure out, how did your mom who raised you take the information when you did finally share with her that you were getting to know your birth mom?
She was happy for me. I think she was also a little afraid that, I might have strong feelings and attachments to my birth mother. We never really talked about it. I think that's part of the Japanese culture. They don't really talk about feelings like that. But I was always very sensitive to that with her, because I love her so much. I didn't want her to ever think that,
Yeah.
that my birth mother would replace her or anything of that nature.
Yeah. Is there something she could have done or said? Sort of, if we're thinking about the parents watching this, who are mostly adoptive parents, is there something you'd like them to know about how they might handle that situation if it comes up?
I think, just to let your child know that you love them and that you will always be there for them. I knew that with my mother, but just to always reinforce that and to know that, you can always come to me and we are here 100% to support you as you find and search and develop a relationship with your birth mother, and
Yeah.
say that we love you,
Yeah, I think you really lucked out. It sounds like, both genetically and in terms of all the family members involved. So now I get to my issue here. I have a point that I make on my little notes about birth father. And in your case, the birth father situation is not that, I mean, it's a little surprising, but actually we've heard about this sort of thing before. Can you share what the birth father identity issue was?
Okay, so yeah, basically, I say a little bit
Regarding
more.
the two different names that you were given?
Oh yes, okay. So as I got to know my birth mother, she did not want to share with me a lot of information about my birth father. In fact, we had one conversation and that was pretty much it. She said she didn't want to ever have any relationship with him again and didn't want me to contact him. And that I felt a little bitter about, because I felt like I had a right, not a right, but I really wanted to know who my birth father was. And I was an adult at that point and felt that I was mature enough to, either pursue it or not. But I respected her wishes. She asked me not to. And so I didn't until I actually ended up doing so due to health reasons later on and after she had passed. And so, yeah, she had told me, not she, but relatives had told me it was this one fellow that she dated in high school. And so all these years, I thought it was this one guy. And come to find out, she actually told me the truth, the name of the person who my birth father is. And I didn't believe her because, at that time she was drinking and I didn't know what to believe. And so she actually, in the end, did tell me the truth. And come to find out, she was trying to protect me. She had very valid reasons.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, in the movie when the person is walking into the haunted house and you're yelling, "Don't go," you're yelling at the screen, like, "Don't go into the basement." When I read the part of the book where she said his name, and I was like, God, I hope she go find him. I'm yelling at the book, go find him before it's too late. So then goosebumps again. So then you wait And you eventually do figure out or find him, but you find him at his grave.
Right. He had just
Yeah.
passed a year before. Yeah. So that was one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't find him when he was still alive. But yet I was torn because I wanted to respect my birth mother's wishes. So
You are a dutiful daughter in every respect, for sure, right? Yeah. Okay. And that meeting or finding him, or at least finding his identity, then brought you a whole nother set of family members. And that when the phone starts ringing, like one after another family member comes out of the woodwork, so to speak, I was just so excited for you at the end of the book. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so come to find out, I have 4 half siblings. It's a whole nother family now to get to know, and they welcomed me with open arms, and it's been beautiful with my siblings. I feel very fortunate. I really am.
And I think for people who are adopting, this is the point I want to really drive home, is that there is no such thing as too much love, right? Like, we as parents who raise children through adoption, when our children have the privilege and luxury of connecting with their extended birth families, we don't lose anything. Our children are still as much our children, right? When we raise them, we love them. They're still our children in that regard. But when our children are able to connect to these extended Ohanas, all these genetic family members, that only enriches their life. It doesn't in any way threaten the nuclear family that you're raised in, right? And I think that's such an important concept. There's no threat there. There's only benefit.
Absolutely.
Your mother passed away 53 years to the day that she had placed you for adoption.
Correct.
When I read that, I had to read it twice, because we hear and we believe that there are these connections, and that this placing a child can be the most profound thing a woman ever does. That when you place a child for adoption, that somehow impacts you in a way that no one else can ever understand. And the fact that she passed away then 53 years to the day, that got me in a way, just, whew. Okay, so we're at almost an hour already, if you can believe it. And I think that you've done such a great job answering questions. I'm looking and I don't see that there are any questions. So I just want to let you have the final words here. And if you can just say, having written this book, having been on this journey, how do you feel now that you've shared your story with the world? Is there anything you want people to know?
Well, now I feel 100% complete, so having not known who my birth mother was, and then for many years not knowing who my birth father was, I was never fully complete. And it wasn't until I found both of them, even though my birth father had passed. Now my life is so enriched now with my half siblings, and I continue to have a very strong relationship with my parents who raised me. They're 90 years old now.
Wow.
But I love them so much, and I appreciate so much what they did for me. And so I'm very blessed.
Yeah. And having that, added benefit of knowing who you are, which shouldn't be a big deal, right? Like, that's kind of everybody's birthright, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I finally know now, where my passions come from. And I know even about my medical history, and, how that may affect me in the future. And that was another thing, every time I go to the doctor, they'd ask for my medical background and my family history. And I would say, well, I don't know anything. And so now I know everything. And so it's wonderful. I feel very complete.
It's one of those many little things that we take for granted. And I think for our children, we need to remember every time you go to the doctor, that injury is kind of poked at, that reminder that you're different, that you are missing things that other people aren't missing. It's kind of, poked at, and we need to be very sensitive with our children, that there are so many times in your sort of average everyday life where the adoption issue may come up.
Yes.
Well, I have been changed by your book, and I have been doing this for 30 years. And I just want to say I'm so grateful that you took the time to write it and that you wrote it so beautifully.
Thank you so
It really is it's a heartwarming story, and I'm so happy for you that you were able to complete your story in this really wonderful way. And I'm just so grateful for the time you've given us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We'll talk again.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.